She came to his wedding in a red dress, like a challenge to the heavens themselves. No one knew who this woman was, but everyone felt a chill when her gaze fell upon the groom. He was smiling at the guests, unaware that today would mark the beginning of his downfall. Daniel was one of those people envied by almost everyone, a successful entrepreneur, owner of a restaurant chain, handsome with impeccable manners. His fiancée was the heiress of a prominent family, the quiet and refined Marina. Guests gravitated towards them, offering congratulations, raising glasses of champagne, and admiring the perfect couple. No one even noticed as she entered the hall, in a red dress with a cold smile. Her name was Alina, and none of those present knew that several years ago Daniel had been the one to destroy her life. The story began in a small coastal town. Back then, Alina was a design student, working part-time as a waitress in one of Daniel's restaurants. He first noticed her there, vibrant, full of life, with a daring smile. She wasn't like those who tried to please the wealthy, and that's what hooked him. Their romance ignited instantly, like a spark in dry grass. For Alina, it was her first true love. She trusted him completely, dreamed of their future, made plans. For him, however, it was merely a diversion. When the girl accidentally discovered that Daniel was engaged to the daughter of a powerful businessman and their wedding was only a matter of time, she felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. But the worst was yet to come. Alina decided to talk to him. She went to his office, trembling but resolute. Daniel listened to her, smiled, and coldly said, "You were just a game to me. Don't flatter yourself." She tried to argue, but he had her fired from the restaurant. Moreover, rumors began to circulate in town about her affairs with married men. Her reputation was destroyed in an instant. Friends turned away, professors looked at her with disapproval, her parents were in despair. Her life lay in ruins, and it was then that Alina made a vow to herself. One day, he would pay for everything. Years passed. She moved to the capital, graduated from university, achieved success. No longer that naive girl, but a confident woman. And then, 5 years later, she learned that Daniel was getting married, and she decided to return. The wedding reception was in full swing. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Marina was radiant, like an angel, and Daniel held her hand as if it were his most precious treasure. He didn't notice the storm brewing in the hall. Alina sat at a table by the wall, watching. Her gaze was cold and precise, like a knife's edge. She hadn't come to cause a scene. No, her plan was far more subtle. Revenge is an art. When Daniel finally noticed her, he seemed to turn to stone. For a moment his smile faltered, his eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself. None of the guests understood, but Alina saw. He recognized her. "Good evening," she said, approaching them as if she were one of the guests. "Congratulations to you both. What a beautiful couple." Marina smiled politely, but Daniel paled. He understood. This was only the beginning. Alina disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving behind a trail of whispers and curious glances. But that very night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Her face kept appearing before his eyes, the face of someone he had hurt, who had returned for payment. The next morning, he received the first gift. A letter with no signature awaited him. Inside were photographs, him and Alina together on the beach, in a restaurant, in her small apartment. Someone had been watching them even then, 5 years ago. And now these pictures could destroy his marriage, his reputation, his business. There was no signature,
Just one line. Do you still remember how much it hurts? Daniel clenched the papers until his knuckles turned white. He knew it was her. Daniel sat in his office, holding the photographs. His heart was pounding so loudly he thought his employees outside the door would hear it. He was used to controlling everything. People, events, even his own emotions. But now, control was slipping away. And for the first time in years, he felt fear. His phone vibrated. An unknown number.
"Did you get my gift?" The voice was female, low, calm. "What do you want?" he hissed, jumping up from his desk. "Nothing for now," she replied. "Just remember, this is only the beginning." A dial tone. Daniel threw the phone on the desk. His hands were shaking. He knew if these photos reached Marina or her father, it was over. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was a contract sealed by millions. Losing his bride's family meant losing business, connections, status. And that was exactly what she wanted. Alina sat by the window of her apartment, looking at the lights of the big city. She savored every detail of her plan. Revenge shouldn't be quick. It should be precise, like a game of chess. Every move was a step toward checkmate. She knew Daniel better than he thought. She knew his pride, his greed, his weaknesses. And that's where she planned to strike. In her hands was an old photo album. In one picture, they were together, laughing, happy. Alina ran her fingers over the image and whispered, "You took everything from me. Now I will take more from you." Meanwhile, Daniel tried to act as if nothing had happened. At meetings with investors, he smiled, spoke confidently, but inside, anxiety was eating away at him. He tried to figure out what Alina wanted. Money? Fame? A scandal? But no, that would be too simple. He remembered her look at the wedding, icy, yet full of fire. It wasn't a thirst for profit. It was a thirst for justice. And that scared him most of all. In the evening, he returned home. Marina met him in the living room, gentle, trusting, unaware that her husband was sitting on a powder keg. "You look tired, darling," she said, touching his cheek. "Yes, a little." He forced a smile. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't even hint at it. The next day, a new blow awaited him. A courier arrived at the office with an envelope. Inside weren't photos, but a copy of a contract for the sale of one of the restaurants Daniel had orchestrated 5 years ago. The deal was illegal. He had set up his partner, taking the business for himself. The document was accompanied by a note.
I wonder what the tax authorities will say when they find out. Daniel felt the ground give way beneath him. She knew. She had found everything he had so carefully hidden. He dialed her number himself. "What do you want?" His voice was breaking, tense. "Don't rush," she laughed softly. "I haven't decided yet. Maybe I just want to watch you slowly lose everything you love." "If you touch Marina," he began. "Oh, don't worry," Alina interrupted. "I won't harm her. I will only harm you." Again, a dial tone. Several days passed. Alina didn't appear, but her shadow followed him everywhere. He was afraid to check his mail.
checked his phone every 5 minutes, lived in constant tension. Marina noticed the change. "Danya, what's wrong with you?" she asked one day. "You've become distant." He wanted to lie, to say he was tired, that work was overwhelming, but the trust in her eyes pained him. Alina, at that moment, was sitting in a cozy cafe watching him through the window. She tracked his every move, and the more nervous he became, the closer she felt to victory. But there was another voice in her heart, quiet, almost forgotten. She had once loved him truly, and that love hadn't completely disappeared. That's why her revenge was so cruel, because behind it stood a devoted, shattered love. One evening, she caught herself holding their old photo and smiling. "No," Alina whispered, throwing the picture into a drawer. "No doubts. He must pay." The next step was a blow to his business. The news featured an article, "Prominent entrepreneur Daniel Orlov suspected of tax fraud." Journalists picked up the story instantly. The reputation he had built over years began to crumble before his eyes. He knew whose doing it was.
And he understood. Soon Alina would make her next move. Meanwhile, Marina increasingly caught sidelong glances from friends, read newspaper headlines, felt storms gathering around her family. She knew nothing of her husband's past, but her heart told her he was hiding something. Alina saw this, and a new feeling was born in her soul. Not just revenge, but a desire to show Marina the truth. Because the only thing that could break Daniel completely was to lose the love of the one for whom he had sacrificed everything. And that's what Alina planned to do next. Scandalous articles about Daniel's machinations didn't leave the front pages of the newspapers. His partners began to doubt him. Investors stalled. Deals fell through one after another. But that wasn't what tormented him most. What tormented him most were Marina's eyes. "Danya, tell me honestly," she said quietly one evening at dinner. "It's all not true. These rumors, the articles, I don't want to believe it, but—" He stared at his plate, unable to meet her gaze. Lies had once come so easily to his lips, but now his tongue felt glued to the roof of his mouth. "It's dirty rumors," he finally forced out. "Someone just decided to ruin my life." Marina nodded, but doubt appeared in her eyes for the first time. Alina watched from the sidelines. She knew doubt is a seed that needs to be watered to grow into distrust. The next day, Marina received an envelope, unusual, with no return address. Inside were several photographs, Daniel and Alina together, from those very days when they were a couple, smiles, embraces, kisses, and a short note. "Are you sure you know who you married?" Marina couldn't believe her eyes. She trembled, trying to convince herself it was a montage, a fake, but the photos were too real, too alive. She said nothing to her husband that evening. She just went to bed silently, turning to the wall.
Daniel felt that something had changed. He tried to hug her, hold her close, but she pulled away. And this coldness killed him far more than the articles and investigations. He called Alina again. "You've crossed a line," he shouted into the phone. "Why are you dragging her into this?" "Ah, Danya." Her voice was quiet, almost tender. "You dragged her into it yourself when you decided you could play with people's lives. She deserves to know the truth." "If you destroy her," he began. "I'm not destroying anything," Alina interrupted.
You are. I'm just lifting the veil." For the first time in his life, Daniel felt he was losing something he had never truly valued: love. Marina began to avoid him. She stayed with her parents, spent evenings with friends, answered his calls less and less, and the more he tried to hold on to her, the further she drifted away. Alina watched this with cold satisfaction. She saw his torment, and a strange mix of feelings grew in her soul: the sweetness of victory and the bitterness of memory. One evening, Marina finally made up her mind. "Danya," she said, looking him straight in the eye, "tell me the truth. Did you love her?" His heart sank. He knew who she meant. "That was a long time ago," he said carefully. "A mistake of youth." "A mistake?" Her voice trembled. "But in these photos, you look happy." "I love only you," he said quickly, taking her hands. But there was no faith in her eyes, only pain and disappointment. Meanwhile, Alina was preparing her next blow. This time, it had to be decisive. She had compiled a whole dossier: documents, correspondence, copies of illegal deals, recorded conversations. Everything was ready for publication. But she understood. The final touch wasn't newspapers or courts. The final touch was Marina's heart. Alina decided to meet her in person.
Marina came to the cafe at the invitation of an anonymous sender. She didn't know who she would see, but she felt inwardly that it would be important. And when a woman in a red coat approached her table, Marina's heart stopped. "Hello," said Alina, taking off her gloves. "I think you can guess who I am." Marina nodded silently. "I don't wish you any harm," Alina continued. "On the contrary, I want you to know the truth." She took a folder out of her bag and placed it on the table. Inside were documents and photographs, everything that could destroy Daniel's life. "Look, and decide for yourself who is by your side." Marina opened the folder with trembling hands. Page after page, photo after photo. With each new piece of evidence, her world crumbled. "Why are you doing all this?" she whispered. Alina looked straight into her eyes. "Because I loved him, and he destroyed me." When Marina returned home, Daniel was waiting for her, pacing nervously around the living room. "Where have you been?" His voice broke. She threw the folder on the table. "Explain this to me." He paled. "Marina, it's all not true, distorted facts." "Enough lies," she shouted for the first time. "I can't take it anymore." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Daniel reached out, but she pushed him away. "I don't know who you are, but you're certainly not the man I married." And in that moment, Daniel understood he was losing. Everything was falling apart.
And Alina, sitting in her apartment, looked at her phone. She knew he would call soon, with a plea, a beg, with despair. She was waiting for that call. The phone rang closer to midnight. Alina knew who it was before she even looked at the screen. She picked up the receiver, unhurriedly. "Well?" Her voice was cold. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel's voice was desperate. "You've already destroyed everything. My marriage, my reputation, my business. What more do you want?" "Honestly," she paused, "I want you to feel what I felt. Helplessness, betrayal, emptiness." He was breathing heavily into the phone. "We can make a deal," he finally said. "Money, power, I'll give you anything." Alina smirked. "You still don't get it. Money is the last thing I need." The next morning, Daniel pulled himself together and decided to act for the first time in a long while. He wasn't going to be a victim. In the past, he had risen to the top not through luck, but through cunning and cruelty. Why should now be any different? He gave instructions to a private detective. Find everything connected to Alina. her connections, her work, her weaknesses. If she decided to play against him, he would play against her. That evening, a stranger called her. "Your name is Alina, right? I have information about your ex. I think you'll like it." She was wary, but agreed to meet. In a small bar in the city center, she saw a man around 40 with a tired face. "I worked for Orlov," he introduced himself, "and I know what he did, not just to you. He ruined more than one life." The man handed her a flash drive. "It's all here. You can use it if you want. I'm tired of keeping silent." Alina clenched the flash drive in her hand. Now she had even more weapons.
Meanwhile, Daniel was being briefed. Alina had indeed achieved success. She had her own design agency, connections in the press, influential acquaintances. She wasn't that naive girl who could be intimidated anymore. "But everyone has weaknesses," the detective said. "In your case, it's her past." "What do you mean?" "Her parents. They still live in that same coastal town, an old house, debts. I think she cares what happens to them." Daniel thought it over. He didn't want to harm her family, but he understood this might be his only trump card. At that time, Marina was packing her things. She decided to go to her parents, to take a break. "I'm sorry, Danya," she said, looking into his eyes. "I can't do this anymore. I need time." He tried to stop her, but her decision was firm. And when the door closed behind her, he felt completely alone. Alina found out a couple of hours later. Her people, who were now watching Daniel themselves, informed her. She smiled. Everything was going according to plan. But that same night, she received a message. "Want to protect those you care about? Then come tomorrow at midnight. You know where." Attached was a photo of her parents. They were sitting on a bench near their house. The photo was taken today. Alina paled, her heart clenched. Daniel had started playing dirty. At midnight, she arrived at an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Twilight, emptiness, the smell of rust. And there he was, Daniel. "You've gone too far," he said, stepping out of the shadows. "But I can make moves too." "Are you threatening my parents?" Her voice was steady. "I just want you to stop. If not, who knows what might happen."
Alina took a step forward. Her eyes flashed. "If you lay a finger on them, I will destroy you so thoroughly you will have nothing left. No business, no name, no freedom." He smirked, but inside he felt uneasy. There was no fear in her voice, only rage. They stood facing each other, like two enemies in a duel. And for the first time, Daniel understood. This woman would never surrender. And at the same time, deep down, he felt something strange, that very spark that had once attracted him to her. Strength, passion, uncompromisingness. "Why are you still fighting me?" he asked. "If you were indifferent, you would have forgotten long ago." Alina froze. Her breath hitched. "Because I loved you, you idiot." Those words hung in the air, and they held more power than all the threats. Daniel was at loss for words. He suddenly understood. All her revenge was the cry of a soul that had once belonged to him. But reconciliation was impossible. Too much blood, too much pain had spilled between them. And yet, that night, their war changed. It ceased to be just a game of destruction. Now it was a battle of past and present, love and hatred, where there might be no winner. At dawn, Alina returned home. She knew Daniel wouldn't give up. He would retaliate, look for her weaknesses, pressure them. But she was ready too, because the final act of this story lay ahead. With each new week, their game became more dangerous. Daniel was losing control more often.
Meetings with partners fell through, the press finished him off, and Marina didn't return. One thought pulsed in his head. Alina. She had taken everything from him. But at the same time, he felt, without her, he could no longer breathe. Alina had changed too. She had achieved what she wanted, destroyed his life, made him feel pain. But along with satisfaction came emptiness. Every night, when she closed her eyes, she didn't dream of his defeat, but of the time that he held her hand and whispered words she foolishly believed.
She often asked herself the same question. What if he had acted differently back then? But the past couldn't be changed. One evening, Daniel called again. "We need to meet," he said. His voice was hoarse, tired. "For the last time." "To do what?" "Threaten me?" "To end all this." Alina hesitated but agreed. They met in the same coastal town where it all began, on the embankment where they once walked like love-struck teenagers. Daniel looked different, gaunt, with a shadow in his eyes, as if he had aged 10 years. "Look at me," he said. "Are you satisfied? You got what you wanted." "I've lost everything." Alina looked at the sea. "No," she replied quietly. "I wanted you to understand." "I understand." He stepped closer. "But I also understood something else. Without you, I have no meaning." She shuddered. There was no play in his voice, only despair. "You destroyed us yourself," Alina said. "I came back to reclaim my power. I wanted to break you the way you broke me." "And you did," he smirked. "But in doing so, you gave back something I lost long ago." "What?" she asked. "The ability to feel." They stood opposite each other, and there was still a chasm between them. But at the same time, a fragile thread appeared. Old, damaged, but not completely broken. At that moment, a car pulled up nearby. Marina got out. She had found out about the meeting, having tracked her husband. "So that's how it is." Her voice trembled. "I kept waiting for you to tell the truth, and now I see it with my own eyes." Daniel froze. Alina too. "Marina," he began.
"Quiet!" she shouted. "You said you loved me, but all this time your heart belonged to her." Tears glistened on her cheeks. "I'm leaving forever, Daniel. You've lost me." She got in the car and drove away. Alina felt bitterness. She hadn't wanted this. She wanted the truth, but not this ending. "Now you're truly alone," she whispered. Daniel lowered his head. "Maybe that's how it should be. I've paid the price for everything." Months passed. The scandals died down. The press moved on to new sensations. Daniel's business was almost destroyed, but he held on by a thread. Marina went abroad and never returned. Alina went back to work, developing her agency, but she felt an emptiness. Her revenge was complete, but it brought no happiness. They met by chance, in a small bookstore. He was holding an old novel, she a design album. Their eyes met. "You've changed," he said. "And you've gotten older," she replied. A pause hung between them. "It's over," Alina added. "Our story is finished." Daniel nodded, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. Hope or regret? Alina couldn't tell. They went their separate ways, each on their own path. Love and revenge were intertwined so tightly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. All that remained was memory and scars that would never fade.